Hi, this is James Valvis, and I'm going to be reading some of my poems today. Since it's a Tuesday, and nobody ever really cares about a Tuesday, things get boring around the whole poetry world on a Tuesday. I figured I would try to do something maybe a little different than I normally do, which is to not just read one poem, but four poems. All four of my poems that appeared in the Wormwood Review. And the reason I want to do it this way is because I want to talk about the Wormwood Review, which I think, to this day, is the greatest small press literary magazine of all time. In fact, I don't think there's even anything close to it. I think if you had a chart of small press magazines, the Wormwood Review would be way out on the far right of the bell curve, and everything else would be bunched over on the far left. That's how highly I think of it. The Wormwood Review was around for 40 years. Its editor was Marvin Malone. It was from 1959 to 1999. And in that time, it published just about every major American writer of the Wormwood style. So you weren't going to find Dean Young in those pages, or somebody like that, but somebody with a language school background. But you were going to find, somebody like Adrienne Rich, whose work is absolutely horrendous. By the way, it's terrible. I have no idea why anybody appreciates her stuff. I can't even read it. Someone like Ruth Stone, it's just, it just gives me shivers how bad that stuff is. But anybody who worked in the sort of what eventually became known as stand-up style, or the talk style, or the just the basic. Sometimes it's called beat, sometimes it's called meat. But it's accessible type verse that mirrors the everyday language, but is heightened. And its main virtue, what differentiates it from prose is that it's condensed. It's like prose is like a lump of coal, and a poetry, the poetry of this type is like a diamond. It's very condensed, or at least it tries to be. Sometimes it just deceptively seems loose, but you realize that you're seeing something that's very compact and impactful in that compactness. It wants to really hit hard for a brief amount of time that it has your attention. And so Wormwood has its own style, and it's produced its own authors, many of which became eventually some of our finest artists. Billy Collins publishes early there. Charles Bukowski is the quintessential. I wouldn't even say that. Charles Bukowski is the most famous of the Wormwood poets, and of course he goes on to become a literary icon. But I would say the quintessential Wormwood poet would be Gerald Lachlan. Gerald Lachlan is my favorite writer, my favorite living writer, at the moment that we're speaking, which is July 2018. He is absolutely one of the most interesting and thoughtful and transgressive thinkers and poets that ever worked in the small press, and that he is largely neglected by the masses. And I'm even talking not even just the general public. I'm talking about the masses of poets. It's almost criminal. I can't even figure it out. It has to do with the times. We live in a time where there's this old white guy who wasn't a massive feminist or something. He should just be forgotten about. But I think that Gerald Lachlan is an immensely influential and thoughtful and fun writer to study and to read. And I've thought this since I was a young man, when I was reading him in the Wormwood Review, and I would say over and over again that Bukowski's the famous guy, but I don't get it, because Gerald Lachlan is always better than Bukowski. I always like his poems more. I always think more highly of them, and I also felt the same way about Lachlan's friend Ron Kirchie, who is an excellent poet. He's hysterically funny, and he's smart, and he looks at things in a skewed way, and it makes you think. And he's also an excellent young adult writer. If you ever get a chance of reading his young adult novels like Stoner and Spaz and Confessorama and things of that sort. So Yeah, so Marvin Malone was the editor, and when I was about 22 and I was in the army, I started sending him poems. And of course, I didn't get accepted right away. I had no idea that the Wormwood Review was such a legendary, even at the time, when the early 90s when I started sending to him. At the time, it was a legendary kind of journal. And it's not much to look at. I was a subscriber when I was in the army and shortly after. And it was it's got a card cover, and it's got it's just simple line drawing on the cover usually, and then the table of contents or the authors on the back, and and the poems themselves are not arranged in any special way, and they run into each other, and they basically you could share a page with two other writers sometimes, and there are no illustrations, or except maybe in the front a little bit, and a lot of and all of the work itself is all accessible kind of poetry. So it doesn't seem it has no pretensions. Most of the work has no pretensions, and if you're not publishing or writing what is viewed as pretentious work, or it's not viewed as pretentious, it's viewed as I don't know, academic maybe, or if you're not giving the academic some kind of job to do, to decipher, to be the middleman between you and the reader, it's viewed as inferior work in some way. I've never bought this idea. I still don't think it's right. I think it's just a terrible way of going about your art, to need to have somebody interpret the piece for you because it's not evident to a regular, intelligent person. But it was kind of looked down upon by the literary establishment, but it was nevertheless, it kept discovering great writer after great writer after great writer, and many of the writers that I came to love the most, and to this day, originally appeared in the Wormwood Review. And so if you can ever get your hands on copies of these, and it's not easy anymore because they sell for 50, 60, 70, $200 if it's a Bukowski one with a lot of Bukowski in it. If you can get your hands on these things, they're just great joys to read even now. Some of it's dated, some of it has its place and time, and it becomes anachronistic a little bit. But for the most part, the poems are still a joy to read. I never pick up, when I get a new Wormwood, it's like Christmas for me. It's just incredibly, I just can't wait to tear it open and start reading it. I ask for them for Christmas and things of that sort. I ask for them for my birthday. So if you're ever looking to get me a gift, get me a Wormwood that I don't have, because I will love you forever. Anyway, I started sending my poems to Marvin Malone in the early 90s, and at the time, I was young, and I was writing poetry, and a lot of stuff I wrote dripped with pretension and sentimentality, and I didn't yet have full command of my voice, but I was getting there, and I was getting there early, because at 22, it's a very young age. It's not like I was 52 or something and trying to get there. I was there. I got there pretty early, and I was reading writers like Lachlan, and somebody like Saroyan, and people of that sort who spoke in a clear voice, and to some degree I was mimicking them, and certainly the poems that I'm going to read today were definitely, they're very much influenced by Gerald Lachlan, and to some degree Bukowski, but much more to a greater extent Lachlan. A lot of times people would say to me, "Oh, you're influenced. You're a Bukowski clone," and I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a Carver clone, or I'm a Lachlan clone. Bukowski's okay, but he's not everything to me. He's just he's another writer that I've read, and that's all." Anyway, so I started writing him, and I started submitting, and he turned down a few poems, and he turned down a few submissions, but we were friendly, and we were I started a literary journal myself. I sent him a copy of that. He was sending me copies of the Wormwood, sometimes free, because he knew I was struggling financially. And he was just a great guy. He was a terrific guy. And we must have exchanged 6 or 7 letters, of which I only kept 2 or 3 tops. They're some of my most prized possessions, but at the time I didn't realize I was talking to Marvin Malone, editor, legendary editor of the Wormwood Review. I was just talking to an editor, and it didn't seem to me like this was important stuff. I probably put coffee cup on the letter for, after I read it. That's the way I looked at it back in those days. You're young, you're just doing things to do them, and so we exchanged the letters, and he kept turning down my stuff, but eventually I hit with two poems. I actually got two acceptances from the Wormwood Review, and each time was two poems. And the first two, I forget which two were the first two. I think it was Just Your Average Guy and Letter to the Editor. I think those two were the first two that I got accepted, and then the second two that I got accepted right after that was The Disease and Second Fiddle. And but then right after that, after I had my little run of luck with the Wormwood Review, I moved to Michigan with my ex-wife, and that was probably the biggest mistake of my life. I went there, and everything in my life went to hell. I ended up homeless. I had no car. I had no money for stamps or to send to work out, or my magazine had to fold after a single issue. I just had no luck at all, and I couldn't find work. It was, there was, even though it was the .com bubble was going on then. I was in Hawthorne, Florida. There was, you could put an application in Publix and maybe like Hardee's and hope that they call you, but chances are not. So it was a very rural area, very economically blighted, and outside Gainesville, Florida, probably about maybe 40 or 50 miles north of it, maybe 30 miles north of it. But it was all woods, and it was all, it was a bar down the road, and a lot of people hanging out at the bar and sitting on their porches, and that was about it. And so I struggled financially, and I became homeless, not once but a couple of times. And by the time I eventually got back on my feet, the Wormwood Review was no more. Bukowski had died in '93, and eventually, a few years later, in '99, after he made 40 years, Marvin Malone, who was not doing well himself, health-wise, stopped the run of Wormwoods after 40 years. It's an incredible run of literary production. It's just amazing. When I look back on it, just the dedication to put out an issue every 3 months of work of that high quality, when you're discovering authors over and over again, and you have an aesthetic, and you meet that aesthetic time and time again, that's an incredible accomplishment. And we should all really appreciate Marvin Malone a lot more, and a lot more people should know about him, and they should know about his legacy, and they should know about these editors who do amazing work to put the poets out there. I mean, everybody thinks of Charles Bukowski as this great author, and he is, but without maybe outside of John Martin, who was the editor of Black Sparrow Books, who published Bukowski's books, probably Marvin Malone is the most responsible for creating Charles Bukowski and creating his writing style. In fact, because when Bukowski first started writing, he wrote in a much more florid manner. If you read his early books, they're much more pretentious than the later works, and that's the influence of the Wormwood, not just the Wormwood editor, not just Marvin Malone, but the Wormwood aesthetic from the other writers, the Gerald Lauchlins and the other people who were writing in the same vein. And so I got these 4 poems published in the Wormwood Review, and for me, for a long time, that was the highlight of my literary success. I was absolutely, to this day, I will sometimes put the Wormwood Review in a cover letter. And I've been in some really good journals. I've been in Plowshares. I've been in The Sun. I've been in Best American Poetry. I've been in, I've been, Verse Daily and Nimrod and Natural Bridge, and I could just go on and on. Really good journals. The Louisville Review. I mean, it's just these are incredible journals, and very hard to get into. And yet, I still will sometimes put the Wormwood Review down in the cover letter, because that's how much I think of that acceptance, or those 2 acceptances really. Ended up in the same journal, the issue 137, in case you're interested. In the same issue, Charles Bukowski's in it. Peter Deci, in his first time ever in the issue, was in it. Lynn Lifshin, Gerald Laughlin, Todd Moore, Charles Harper Webb. And there's a special section by John Levin, which is actually a very good special section. and a couple other writers that you probably don't know, like Alan Jeffries and you know, Peter Bukowski. Even you know, Peter Bukowski is was an excellent writer who not a lot of people would know about today. Um, and so anyway, I got the poems in there, and unfortunately, I was never able to follow up on those successes because my life turned to such crap, and I was unable to really even send work out to anybody. And by the time I eventually got on my feet, which was years later, when I moved here with my wife, and she basically made me financially stable. The Wormwood Review was no more. I was no longer able to continue that relationship. But I did, after he had died, and there were a couple of years had passed, I wrote his daughter, and I asked her if I could revive the Wormwood Review. That's how much I loved the journal. I loved it so much that I wanted to be its editor. I wanted it to continue because I thought it was just an incredible magazine. And maybe that's probably a little bit of vanity going on there to think that I could have really carried on that aesthetic and do it as well as he did. Um, uh, but his daughter, I think, wisely told me no, he wanted it to end with him, and that I should start my own thing. And I think that was the wise thing to do. I don't think that I would have been able to carry on his incredible standard. Um, Certainly not at the beginning, and even later on. I don't know that I was ever had the temperament to go through and keep a magazine going that long. I just had a friend, Troy, whose poems I'm going to be reading later this week, asked me, if I still considered uh, starting a magazine, because I've floated this idea before, and sometimes I think I will do it, and sometimes I think I won't. And of course, I'm financially stable enough, and stable in my life enough now that I could do it. But I'm also pushing 50, and I don't. Men in my family, they die in their 50s, so it just seems like something I should have done 10 or 15 years ago, and I'm not sure that at this point it would be the best use of my time. I'm a writer. I spend a lot of time writing. I don't have the energy I used to have, and it's difficult for me. It's difficult to see me spending all that time reading through all those poems, because you're going to see a lot of them. Because I would never charge a reading fee. I think reading fees are an abomination. However, I would keep costs down by running a. I would basically copy the Wormwood Review. I would do it exactly like the Wormwood Review, except I would call it something else. Because I think that this is the best form for a small press journal. It is low in production but high in quality. That is the best way to go when you're dealing with this kind of material. Because let's face it, poetry is an acquired taste. Poetry doesn't have the vast audience necessary for these glossy journals that we're seeing everywhere. They're paying outrageous fees to have these flat spine glossies, and they're not able to keep up with the finances of that. And so, in addition to just having no respect for their writers, I guess, in order to float these obscene costs, they're having to charge writers just to submit to them, which I find offensive. I don't think is a good idea. It's terrible for the art. It's going to make it more elitist. It's going to make it more white. It's going to make it more male. It's all the stuff that they say that they're for. It's like diversity and all this stuff. They're not. This is hurts that across the board. Across the board, reading fees does it, but nobody calls them on it. Everybody's afraid. Everybody's afraid that if I say something, they won't publish me. They're not going to publish you anyway. Most of the time, don't worry about it. Say what you think. Be a man. Or if you're a woman, be a strong woman. Just be something that's not a freaking lily-livered coward all the time. Everybody's so afraid anymore. When I came up in the small press, when I was writing in the Wormwood Review and other places like that, people said things. They took stands, and if they were wrong, what the hell, they were wrong. People thought they were wrong. So what? You move on to the next person. Maybe they're right. You didn't get all upset about it. You didn't get upset because somebody had a different opinion than you. But in this case, I'm not wrong. There's nothing good about reading fees. Nothing at all. They're basically the same thing as an admission of failure of the art. That's what it is, and it's going to downward spiral until nobody bothers with it anymore, because it already has a small audience. It already has no financial gain attached to it. It already has, a high learning curve and a low reward. And now you're going to charge people to read. I mean, the Wormwood Review went 40 years. 40 years they made this journal. Marvin Malone made this journal. And he found some of the greatest writers, some of the greatest poets that America's ever produced. And he never charged anybody a single dime to submit. Not one dime in 40 years. Now, you can't tell me if this guy can do it for 40 years. There's no reason anybody needs to do it today. It's just wrong. It's immoral. Anyway, so that's a lot to say about 4 small poems. But, I love the journal. I hope that everybody respects what Marvin Malone did. I hope that everybody, if you can get your hands on a copy like this, get it and then preserve it. Don't blow it. Don't let your kids get it and then they, throw it out or they eBay it to some loser. Just find a way to preserve it, even if you have to give it to a library, whatever you have to do, because these things are extremely valuable and they're becoming extremely rare, and they're also expensive. And so, okay, let me read these 4 poems, and they're written in almost a Lachlan style, and they're meant to be humorous, and they're meant to be very accessible, and a couple of them are pretty short. Actually, they're all 4 of them are pretty short, but one is really short. The letter to the editor poem is really short, and so I'll take them one at a time, and I might say something in between just to keep you on your toes. All right, the first poem, letter to the editor. Publish these poems. I know where you live. All right, this is the second poem. Just your average guy. I don't understand it. The women in Florida are either supermodel beautiful, or else they look like seals bashed in the head. No middle ground at all. This, of course, does not sit well with someone like me, who's neither handsome nor ugly, charming nor babbling idiot. Just your average guy, looking for your average woman, who is probably in Kansas or Oklahoma, or disappeared off the planet. In which case, it's probably a good thing I'm married. The funny thing is, I'm probably the least likely person to ever cheat on a woman. I've never cheated on a woman that I was with seriously in my life, and so that's clearly a Lachlan inspired thing there. It's not a poem I would write today. I'm just playing there. All right. Now this poem that's coming up, "The Disease," was eventually featured on the Best American Poetry website. Because the writer there, Laura Orm, really liked it. So she picked it up. I posted it on Fictionaut, and she liked it, and she put it on there. And it's basically about my disdain for language poetry, and so that's what it's about. So, "The Disease." I smack, she said, the oriole, riding the rodeo of disinfected dreams. Huh? I said. But lately the pontification of the shedding serpent slips into perfection. What the hell are you talking about? I said. It's poetry, she said. Well, I said, cover your mouth, goddammit. I can't miss any more days at work. And finally, this last poem, called "Second Fiddle." Oh my God, she said. My boyfriend's here. Quick, get in the closet. I grabbed my clothes and opened the closet door. Then I thought about it. Wait a minute, I told her. I'm your husband. So there you have it. Those are my 4 Wormwood Review poems. Short and sweet. They seem to me very typical of what Wormwood published, and I hope you like them. And, as always, I appreciate you listening. This has gone on a long time, but I really wanted to say stuff about Wormwood because I still love the magazine. And if you have a Wormwood that you're not reading anymore and it's just sitting on a shelf, well, you can always send it to me because I'll love you for it. All right. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share this collection of poems. And God bless you.